The college football playoff rankings have done it again, folks. I don't understand how a group of 13 people who are considered to be smart, educated individuals keep messing it up. But here we are, folks, and look, it's inexcusable, it's indefensible, but we're going to try to get through it and talk about all sorts of craziness going in the IU sports world. I can't remember a more jam-packed episode we've had in the entire history of the Hoosier Sound. And welcome, Hoosier Nation, to our 173rd episode, where we are the official podcast of Indiana HQ. Our mission and goal is simple. We want to bring in-depth analysis and coverage for Indiana University sports to as many fans as possible across a multitude of modern platforms. We're recording this edition of the Hoosier Sound on December 15th, 2020, where I'm your host, Nithin Krishnan. Here with me tonight is my longtime partner and Hoosier Sound co-founder, Noah Freeman. Noah, you picked a heck of a show to join this year. Hey, even the Hoosier Sound Twitter account is back. How are you doing on this fantastic Tuesday evening?
You and I this kind of sums up the week and what this entire episode is going to be. If you are listening to this as a podcast, as the majority of you do listen to, and you don't listen to us live, which you can, by the way, Tuesday evenings, 8:30 p.m., just a quick shout out right there. Come interact with us live. If you are listening to this to the podcast, you probably already see how long this episode is going to be. But as the days kept going from the end of the show around 9:45 p.m. last Tuesday, December 8th, the topics just kept piling on and piling on and piling on, and then it just kind of is overflowing. The bucket has overflowed at about 7:30 p.m. tonight on December 15th with topics and everything, starting with what you said with the CFP rankings. And I mean, like we were going over things, and I had completely forgot that the Florida State game happened in between the last podcast and this podcast. It seems like forever ago that game happened. But okay, where to start for the CFP rankings? And we're going to do our best to hold it together and to not go on ridiculously long with talking about the rankings, because as all of you have now seen, Indiana has moved up. You would think, wow, they moved up. They finally moved up. Even though they didn't play a game, they still moved up, but they only moved up despite Miami losing their game to go to 2 losses. They lost to UNC, a ranked team, by the way, which we're going to talk about in a second, how they lost to a ranked team and went down 8 spots compared to other teams who lost to non-ranked teams and went down 1 spot. But Indiana only goes up to number 11. And my first thought was, wait a second, as I watched, so I actually watched the show tonight to kind of, and what they do is once they get to the top 10, they go backwards. They go 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, or 7, and then they wait to give you the others. So they do it individually. They don't give you in chunks like they do like 21 to 25, 16 to 20, et cetera, et cetera. And I watched and I saw Oklahoma. Then I saw Cincinnati, which is another question mark in a second. Then I saw Georgia. Then I saw Florida. And it was, and then of course I'm like, all right, Iowa State has to be up there too. And my first thought was 4 2-loss teams are ahead of Indiana in the CFP rankings. Even going the past that the AP poll is ranked number 7. So is the coaches poll before them being 4 slots under. And by the way, it's not like this is like 22 versus 18. It's not like there's a small difference between 22 and 18. There is a large difference when you get to the top 10 between number 11 and number 7. And we're going to get into a little more of the minute details on the specific teams and why this is so bad. And I'm not even really upset as much for Indiana as I am just things that happened last week and things that happened to other teams this week and all of the implications around it. But Nithin, before we talk about individual teams, did you kind of have the same thing as just kind of blowing up and just steaming like we were last week as the first set of rankings came through?
I mean, last week I was angry more so at the committee just keeping IU the same spot after Indiana went out there to Madison and beat a really good Wisconsin team. No matter what you say, and I know Wisconsin lost to Iowa on Saturday, At the time, Wisconsin was number 16. It's not IU's fault that Wisconsin has gone on to lose games after that. Okay. Tonight, it blew my mind how idiotic this committee decided to be. It just made no sense. You mentioned it. 4 2-loss teams ahead of Indiana. And a lot of these teams, let's take Iowa State, for example. They went out, they lost to Louisiana at the start of this.
And for that, let's go in order. I like that. I mean, the right top 4 are okay. Texas A&M, that's fine. All that makes sense. Exactly. Top 5, I don't really have
no debate.
Yeah, no debate there. Iowa State, I'm even coming around a little more because recently they've been starting to win and they've been starting to beat teams. And losing to Louisiana is not a bad loss anymore. Louisiana is all the way up for the CFP in number 19. And for the AP poll, they're number 17. For the coaches poll, they're number 18. Yeah. So for what the committee said, as in if you have to beat currently ranked teams for it to matter, which is a direct quote that a committee member said last week, which is going to come back to bite their in their behind later for what with other things. But Iowa State, I'm coming around to them a little more. I don't mind the 2 losses to them as much as other people.
You are too kind to Iowa State, Noah.
I said as much. They've beaten Texas, they've beaten Oklahoma, and they've lost to 2 ranked teams. Compared to some of the other stuff, I don't mind it as much as the teams we're about to
gosh, you are
I still mind it, though.
I can't stand Iowa State being number 6 in the country right now because if you compare the 2 resumes, Indiana's to Iowa State's, blindly, Iowa State's still has a 17-point home loss to a school called Louisiana Lafayette. I mean, there's no reason that team, I don't care if they're ranked 6th, Indiana needs to be higher than that.
I agree.
When you compare Indiana to Iowa State, there's just no way Iowa State can be put ahead of Indiana, especially when you include the fact that Iowa State went to Stillwater and lost to Oklahoma State by 3 points. So to me, Iowa State can't be there. Now, they do have a Big 12 championship game coming up this weekend. By virtue of football, one of those teams has to lose, assuming they play. So Indiana's probably going to leapfrog the loser of that game, but probably doesn't always apply in these cases because for some reason, Florida, the 7th-ranked team in the college football playoff rankings, decided to just stay set. Well, I guess they moved 1 spot down from 6 to 7 after losing to unranked 3-win LSU on Saturday. Explain that one.
I mean, first, you do kind of have to start going on the Iowa State bandwagon. I think you need to root for them now that Indiana is ranked lower than Oklahoma this week, so that it would be at least a for sure. There's no way the committee can rank Indiana below Oklahoma if Iowa State were to beat Oklahoma. The committee, as you've seen how poor their rankings are, if Oklahoma beats Iowa State, there's a chance that Iowa State is still ranked above Indiana after it, with just how bad it is. So I think we need to root for Iowa State, which we're going to talk about that this weekend. We're going to talk about teams who to root for. So Iowa State, sadly, with the way Indiana is ranked above Oklahoma, I think, would you agree that we need to root for Iowa State to beat Oklahoma so that Indiana can at least get 1 spot higher? Because right now we're sadly picking and choosing.
Sure, but on the other hand, if Oklahoma goes out and beats Iowa State, I mean, look, the CFP rankings have already lost that credibility in my eyes. If they go out and
I don't care about your eyes, sadly.
They go out and somehow put a 3-loss Iowa State ahead of Indiana after Oklahoma beats them. I mean, it's going from you're not credible to you're more not credible. So to me, I just don't care. But yeah,
it doesn't matter to them.
Obviously, hops Oklahoma if Oklahoma loses to Iowa State. That's got to be how it goes, especially because Oklahoma would have now lost to Iowa State twice. I mean, come on. But can you explain Florida? I can't explain Florida, and I've watched a lot of football. Having them 7th makes no sense.
I mean, listening to a lot of the IU podcasts, because last week we more or less the same discussions for some of these same teams were had with where they were just originally ranked ahead of Indiana after Indiana beats Wisconsin on the road. And the best answer that I've heard, and the answer I like the most, is that you just can't. You can't explain it whatsoever. And the part that frustrates me the most are these next 2 teams with Florida and Georgia, just because of the comments and the rankings that they put out last week and the reasoning behind it versus what they said this week. Last week, it was really bad. It really was. And as the days went on you started to at least kind of accept it. You didn't necessarily like it, but you accepted it. They're like, all right, this year it's kind of like March Madness, where this year they might favor this type of resume versus another type of resume. Right? All right, maybe
about it. Yeah.
At least this year, maybe they're thinking about, okay, you have to beat currently ranked teams. The teams that are currently ranked in the top 25 as they come out. And I'm like, okay, I don't necessarily like it. I don't agree with it, but I can accept it a little more. But then you come to this week.
Wow.
And you get both teams, Florida and Georgia. Florida 8-2, Georgia 7-2. Florida plays an LSU team that is not the best this year.
They are
definitely not the team they were last year. They are currently after LSU beats Florida. They are currently 4-5. They are still sub 500 after beating Florida. It doesn't matter that they're the defending national champions. It doesn't matter. It means nothing for this year. And the fact that Florida goes down one spot after losing, it doesn't matter that it was a close game. They still lost to a sub 500 team, and they only went down one spot. And think about, if we're Hoosier fans being out of this. We're going to get to that 9th ranked Cincinnati team. How mad do you think Cincinnati Bearcat fans are right now with us? Like, we just need to kind of all join hands across the state lines for that. But then you get into Georgia. Yes, and Coach Tonsoni, that's where I was getting. The perception of the Big Ten compared to the SEC, that is the only explanation that you can even think about. You get to Georgia, where last week, like I already said, the committee talked about currently ranked teams. That's really what they're counting. So it doesn't matter that Indiana beat Penn State when they were ranked. Doesn't matter that they beat Michigan when they were ranked. It doesn't matter that they beat Wisconsin when they were ranked. They're not currently ranked, so it's not a great win. Again, don't like it, but at least that's the precedent that they set.
Yeah, and
Georgia, who beats Mizzou, at the time ranked number 25, and yes, they beat them pretty handily, but now Mizzou is not ranked. And Georgia somehow leapfrogs a 2-loss team. Georgia, the 2-loss team, leapfrogs an undefeated Cincinnati team. And it doesn't matter. It's the same kind of conversation that we have with like UCF every other year, basically becoming undefeated. Cincinnati still has done their resume. They've beaten the teams. They beat a ranked, at the time, Army team and at the time SMU team. And they're still undefeated. Yet Georgia somehow goes ahead of them.
Not only is Cincinnati undefeated, they've gone out and won every game by multiple possessions. You know, they haven't really even had a squeaker in there. Florida lost as a 23-point home underdog to LSU. That is embarrassing. Indiana's only loss this season is a road defeat in Columbus to a Buckeyes team that's in the top 4. If you can't objectively compare those two resumes and say Indiana's is better, you have no business being on the CFP rankings committee. And with the SEC thing, that works maybe in Florida and Georgia's case, but it doesn't work in Iowa State's case, right? Unless the committee thinks Louisiana Lafayette is in the SEC, then we have a whole different issue with that. Florida and Georgia have no business being above Indiana in these rankings, especially when you consider Georgia has no good wins this year. Georgia hasn't beaten Alabama. They lost to Alabama by 3 possessions. Georgia hasn't beaten Florida. And like last week, I was okay with Florida being a top 5, top 6 ranking team. Not only am I not good with Florida staying at 7. Now all of a sudden, Georgia's 16-point home loss to Florida, or neutral loss to Florida, looks worse. Georgia's best win might be a home win over Auburn. Maybe that the road win against Missouri. Again, Missouri's unranked. Makes no sense to me. No, Florida makes no sense. Georgia makes no sense. And I don't know. I mean, what else stands out to you? What am I missing here? And Tom Allen, you know, he's a guy who's always going to take the high road. He spoke to the media earlier today. We're recording this on Tuesday night. He spoke to the media earlier on Tuesday, and he said, look, our work speaks for itself. We've gone out and done what we've had to do. We've gone out and won all the games we've played. Doesn't matter, you know, where they've been. Obviously, the one loss came to Ohio State and Columbus. We've gone out and done it by 7. Again, Indiana scored 28 of the last 35 points in that game against a really good Ohio State team. And Tom Allen's gone out and said, look, at this point, It's not in our hands anymore. Not in our hands anymore. Of course, he mentioned the two cancellations out there of that bucket game. It's a missed opportunity for Indiana to add that extra win to their resume. But my gosh, when you look at the CFP rankings, like none of it makes sense. And I feel bad for Cincinnati. I feel bad for Coastal Carolina. We haven't even talked about Oklahoma, who I don't think has any business being in the top 10 either, even if they go out and beat Iowa State. And again, we're looking at this from an IU perspective. If you go scan social media, national writers who look at these things objectively and don't have any horse in the race, they're looking at this and saying this is the worst CFP rankings job we've seen in the entire history of this new system. Nicole Auerbach, a senior writer with The Athletic, has gone out and said that. Look at the AP poll. I mean, guys, the AP poll is just a handful of writers, 60, 70 writers that go out and they say, hey, we've watched the games, East Coast, West Coast, North, South, and we rank these teams. And look, Indiana, according to the AP voters, is the 7th best team in college football. When you look at the resumes, that makes plenty of sense. They've got Cincinnati at number 6. By the way, they've got Ohio State 3, Clemson 4, but they've got Georgia 10, Oklahoma 12, Florida 11. And if USC goes out and beats Oregon on Saturday in the Pac-12 title game, Indiana might fall even further in the CFP rankings. Again, this is an inexcusable ranking job by the CFP committee. I have no idea what more you could possibly say, Noah, because we've got a million things to talk about tonight. But I said it last week and I'll say it again. To me, look at the AP poll. I love where they have him at 7. Coach asks, where should IU be? 7's a good spot for me. It's hard for me to argue against that. 11 is ridiculous, especially when you see how other teams are compared. I got nothing more. It's a joke of a ranking system. Look at the AP poll. I think even the coaches poll has more value. Is there anything more you've got to say?
Not much. I mean, you talked about Oklahoma itself, and just to put some names with the 7-2 record, you lost to Iowa State, currently the leader in the Big 12. Okay. But you lose to Kansas State, a team that is not where they have been the past couple of years. Kansas State has been a good football team the past 2 or 3 years. Not this year. This year they are back to historically closer to where they usually are. Because Kansas State's usually an up and down team. Right now they are more down at a 4-6 record. You lose to Kansas State. That's a bad loss. Right now the committee's not really valuing losses, good or bad losses. But when it comes to Indiana, for some reason, a loss to in their eyes, the number 4 best team in the entire nation, a team that will most likely get into the actual college football playoffs. It doesn't matter that they went into Columbus and lost by 7. It's just strange. And I think we need to wrap this portion up by talking about teams for Indiana to get in the best possible position for a New Year's 6 game. Now, let's actually go through some of the easier stuff, because there are a couple questions that are, I think, debatable.
Sure.
I think Texas A&M is too far gone with where they are now, and we're starting at 5 right now. Texas A&M will play Tennessee. I think that's a win regardless. If they lose to Tennessee, that's some crazy stuff. Like the Sunday will be even more of a crazy thing, but I don't think that'll happen.
Although I don't know. Maybe they only drop one spot. Maybe they only drop one spot.
That's true.
Because the SEC apparently is the Harlem Globetrotters of college football, and all the other conferences are the Washington Generals.
But then we talked about Iowa State, Oklahoma. I think now that Oklahoma is lower and Iowa State is farther away from Indiana, it makes the most sense to root for Iowa State over Oklahoma than at least Indiana, who's not playing this weekend, which does not help Indiana's resume whatsoever. Even just getting a win against Purdue would have said, hey, we played a game, we won the game. Now keep us, at least move us up. You can't move us down. At least the committee, depending on what happens now, has, without Indiana playing, has a small chance to say, hey, you guys should move down because you didn't play, even though that's not right. But then you have Florida, who this week is playing Alabama. Originally, there were some weird, like a few weeks ago, we were talking about different things as to like maybe Indiana could actually get up still to the CFP rankings, and that has Florida beating Alabama. Not anymore. Alabama's need to get a stomp the Florida Gators, and Indiana needs to go ahead of Florida because, oh my gosh, if you put, like we talked about with Iowa State, if you put Indiana below a 3-loss Florida team, even if those 2 of those 3 losses were what was it, 2 to Alabama then for Florida?
Yep.
No, A&M, LSU, and then Alabama.
Yep.
Okay, so Florida, we are rooting against Florida. So we're rooting for Crimson Tide. We're rooting for the Iowa State Cyclones. Then you get to Georgia, who's playing Vanderbilt. Well, that game actually is canceled, so that's nothing is going to happen there. Even so, Georgia was going to win, regardless of how much we think about Georgia. Yeah. You're not gonna beat an 0 whatever Vanderbilt team.
No. Which on that note, I thought Florida was going to smash LSU, and that didn't happen. But
that's true. I think LSU is a little better than Vanderbilt. Anyway, then you got Tulsa, who Cincinnati is playing. I don't really mind either way. I mean, if Tulsa beat Cincinnati, it would be another spot that goes up. So, we're going to root for Tulsa. But, I mean, Cincinnati's not really in a spot to take much away just because they're not a major Power 5 opponent. And then you got Oklahoma. So, I guess to recap, you're going to root for Crimson Tide. You're going to root for the Cyclones. You're going to root for Georgia's not playing. You're going to root for Tulsa. And that takes out most of the top 10 because a lot of the teams are playing each other. Then the one question I had for you is we really disliked is a nice word to put it, the OSU situation that happened a week and a half, 2 weeks ago with everything. And originally we were all on the bandwagon for let's go Wildcats, beat Ohio State, take them outside of the CFP rankings. But that is a bigger chance for Indiana to possibly, if Ohio State were to drop out of the CFP, to take a major bowl game away for them. A chance, depending. I mean, you can still have 2 Big Ten teams in the New Year's 6 games. But what are you thinking about that OSU Northwestern team?
I think you've got to root, from an Indiana perspective, I think IU fans have got to root for Ohio State just because, if the Buckeyes were to lose that game, for Northwestern being auto lock as the Big Ten champ, getting that New Year's 6 spot. And then, to add to it, all of a sudden Indiana's loss to Ohio State looks worse. Oklahoma lost to Kansas State, and Kansas State has lost 5 games in a row, but Oklahoma still Oklahoma, bad losses apparently don't look bad as the year goes on. But for Indiana, who lost to Ohio State, we know that if Northwestern beats Ohio State, the committee, hey, look, Indiana's resume is tarnished even more now. So we're gonna give them less of a look as far as a New Year's 6 spot goes. I agree with a lot of what you said. As far as who we're rooting for, I think we're rooting for Alabama to wipe the floor with Florida. I do like our friend Rob's comment here. Peyton Ramsey, I know it's hard to root against Northwestern, but maybe Ramsey goes out and has a great game. Ohio State ends up winning. Something like that would be ideal for Indiana football. Cincinnati is almost a lock, just considering the fact that the group of 5 gets an auto spot in the New Year's 6, and Cincinnati looks like they're going to be the best team as far as the group of 5 is concerned. If they lose, then regardless of where Coastal Carolina is ranked, they're probably going to get that spot. So, which speaking of, 12 is Coastal Carolina, 13 USC, 14 Northwestern. So those teams we're going to have to root against as well. Coastal Carolina is playing Louisiana. So that'll actually be an interesting game to see because remember the committee, like we talked about with Iowa State, is putting a lot of stock into that game where Iowa State lost to Louisiana. So we'll kind of see where 12 and 19 teams go up against each other. So root against Coastal Carolina because Louisiana ain't going to jump that high. USC definitely have to root for Oregon because USC is a team that could jump Indiana with a win, especially with Indiana not playing. If Indiana played this weekend and won, it'd be hard pressed to say that you could jump a team that just won a game. And then Northwestern, like we talked about, that's a team that could jump Indiana, beating Ohio State, like you said, being the Big Ten champion. And but I think we're safe after that. Iowa's not going to play this weekend, most likely. North Carolina is an 8-3 team at number 15. I don't think you can put them above Indiana. So I think that kind of closes out our spot. And sadly, Coach Tonsoni said Florida will be ranked ahead of IU regardless. And I agree, because Florida just lost to LSU, a sub-500 team. And if they lose to Alabama, they probably won't even go down, to be honest. They might get moved up. It's like, oh, you got to play Alabama. Yeah. You played them okay, so you're gonna go up to number 6. Yeah. Oh, you only lost by 35. That's a pretty great team. The one wild card that we haven't talked about, and I actually don't know what the ramifications are with this game. Notre Dame Clemson in the ACC title game is kind of strange. Just because if Notre Dame goes out to Clemson, all of a sudden, I know Clemson's got Trevor Lawrence starting this game compared to the regular season matchup, but all of a sudden Clemson left 2 losses, both to Notre Dame. One, was in South Bend, but the other one on a neutral site with a full-strength team. I don't know how the committee will look at that. It's a wild card. These are all different things we've got to consider here in the world of college football, which I guess is run by a bunch of dimwits, but whatever.
That game more goes into the political aspects of bowl game picking, depending on either way, because obviously it doesn't affect Indiana. Even if Clemson were to lose and have 2 losses, there's no way they're going to even be close to IU. So it's more of a conversation that we should just wait for the bowl games to come out instead of trying to nitpick. This team loses, so this team's going to get slotted here, blah, blah, bing, 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 which, by the way, next week we will have, hopefully, probably a bowl game that Indiana will be slated and an opponent.
All sorts of crazy stuff going on. Tom Allen did explicitly mention the Fiesta Bowl as a destination IU's shooting for right now. We'll see how this all plays out over the next few days and over the next week. As we continue this crazy football season, there was other big news, and this time in the basketball world. Parker Stewart. Get to know the name, folks. He's a 6'5", 200-pound guard who transferred out of Tennessee Martin. And yeah, I know you, man. Come on, Tennessee Martin. What use do we have for a Skyhawk? I think that's their team nickname. I'm going to look that up in a second. Shouldn't have just blabbered that out without knowing. But Parker Stewart, a 6'5", 200-pound guard. He entered the transfer portal about a month or two ago, and after major pursuit by a number of high major teams, Parker Stewart committed to Indiana earlier today. He announced that on social media about 2-3 hours ago. It feels like we keep getting major IU sports headlines every hour leading up to our podcast recording. But Parker Stewart is a guy who averaged 9 points and 3 rebounds as a freshman at the University of Pittsburgh. So he's an ACC player when he started his college career, but he decided Pitt wasn't for him. Look, the Panthers went 0-18 his freshman year in ACC play and lost in the first round of the ACC tournament, so maybe that wasn't the best situation for him. He then transferred to UT Martin after sitting out a year. He had a really good season last year in the Ohio Valley Conference where he averaged 19 points a game, 4.5 rebounds, and 3.8 assists. He's a 36.6% career three-point shooter, a 78% career free throw shooter, and he has averaged about 7 3-point attempts per game in his career. All things that should be music to the ears of Indiana Hoosier fans. Now, here's what's interesting. Parker Stewart, even though, he played at UT Martin, he started his career at Pitt, may not be the most pretty thing when you think about it. He's had some big games against some really good teams. And you go back to his freshman year, he scored 23 at Syracuse. And remember, guys, as a Jim Boeheim-led Syracuse team run that 2-3 zone, he knocked down 7 out of 13 threes in that game as a freshman. And then even last year at Tennessee Martin, they played a non-conference game at Baylor. Baylor was a team that was in that discussion as a 1 or 2 seed last year before the world ended. Stewart in that game went out and scored 18 points and had 5 of 12 shooting from three-point range. Now, here's where things get interesting. Because Stewart has graduated and he's immediately eligible, the question becomes, is Stewart possibly going to join this IU team as early as the spring semester? That's actually within the realm of possibility. There is a chance that Stewart joins this team for the spring semester. Now, what date is that exactly is kind of up in the air, in all honesty. He has not decided what his future will be here at Indiana, whether he's just going to suit up at the start of the 2021-22 season, or whether he's going to try to play this year. All sorts of crazy variables in play. But Noah, my question to you is this. If Stewart joins IU in the spring, which is in play, what does it mean for the backcourt, and how do you anticipate sort of the adjustment and adaptation process for Stewart on a team that desperately needs good guard play and desperately needs three-point shooting?
I mean, it's kind of up in the air. First, you were correct, by the way. They're the Skyhawks. The Skyhawk name is Captain Skyhawk is the official mascot name. But Parker Stewart, obviously, with Archie Miller, at least the past couple of seasons, having a couple scholarship spots open, you've always looked to the graduate transfer portal, even midway through the season, because you got the scholarship spots. Why not see if someone can make a splash? And who knows? I mean, it's kind of a win-win situation, at least in terms of Indiana. I don't know about Parker himself, just depending on what his aspirations are and what he wants to do, because obviously he's going to be pretty far down the totem pole in terms of trying to get onto the court. I haven't looked through much tape specifically to get a lot of crazy details, but obviously the first thing that a lot of fans are going to definitely hope for and look at is that 3-point shooting. Now, I don't necessarily think that that's right away that he's going to be able to come in and do that, because I think there are a lot of other things that need to happen before he sees time on the court. First, those being, even if he is eligible, it's just a matter of a bunch of backcourt things going around to where if he can actually start a game, and when is that game going to be started? Like, is he going to have to wait until the actual students start, which is going to be a little later because they took out spring break and they moved it back a week, and like, or can it start like sort of kind of in the middle of January? So what game will that happen? And like, it's going to be in the middle of the Big Ten season, and can he start practicing for the Hoosiers? This is so fresh that there are questions that we don't have for answers on the podcast at the moment. And that might not be as clear when you're listening to this, but I mean, especially if he can't get into even practice for a couple of weeks, it's going to be hard for him to see the court initially. And it's going to be really great to have a different possible scoring dynamic this season when we've seen offensive struggles up until South North Alabama. I'm getting them mixed up now with Kane Wommack. But if he can come in, and even if he gets 2 or 3 minutes off the bench, which I think is at least right now optimistic to where he's going to be able to see time on the court and meaningful time on the court, if he can be one of those, which he's still like a 34.8 or something % 3-point shooter. It's not crazy. It's not like he's shooting above 40%. He's a knockdown 3-point shooter. True. He can make the shot. So I think optimistically, if he's able to see time, he's going to give some guard depth, like maybe like we saw last game, like you have a guy like Al Durham that has a down game, and you've got all these guards. There's going to be a guard every game that probably has a down game. Maybe he can spot one of them and say, hey, I'll take over. I'll score a couple points. And if you can get even 4 or 5, 6 points from him a game, I think that's really good for him, especially coming into the season midway. Because, man, you also got to think about, too, there's just a lot of stuff, because you got to even add, like,
there are, yeah.
The defense that Archie runs is definitely different than stuff that he's done before, because he's got to go back on the other end, and is he going to be a huge liability on defense? So there's just a lot of question marks, but overall it is a very exciting signing, because at least for Indiana, you have someone else that, hey, there's a chance. Even if it's a small chance, there's a chance that there's someone else that might be able to put the ball in the hoop, especially when they need it, and especially at big moments. So
yeah, exactly. And there's also a personal situation that Stewart is dealing with his father passing recently. One of the reasons he chose to play for Indiana is because it's very close to Tennessee and Ohio, where they're from, his family's from. So, there's a big reason as to why Stewart decided to come to Indiana. But hey, look, there were a lot of schools that were in the running for Stewart's services. Just check this list out. Okay, you ready for this? Kansas State, Arkansas, Cincinnati, Nebraska, Memphis, Ole Miss, Washington State, Houston, Oklahoma State, and NC State all reached out to Stewart after he transferred. Mid-season. Exactly.
So there would have been even more teams if this was in an off-season where they had open and available scholarship spots.
Exactly. And his top 4, just to be super clear, were Memphis, Kansas State, Arkansas, and Indiana. So Archie Miller going out and getting another big recruiting win for a grad transfer type player. Remember, he brought in Joey Brunk about a year and a half ago, and now he goes out and gets Parker Stewart. So big news for IU basketball. Keep tabs on that situation, guys, because if nothing else, I'm not sure what to expect from him on a minutes per game standpoint. But this thing is fluid on a day-to-day basis. And look, there are games where Indiana is going to need some instant offense, right? With Devontae Green no longer here, there are going to be games where Indiana calls on Stewart, perhaps, if he does join the team in the spring, to come in and try to, jack up a couple threes and get Indiana back into the game with a quick run. And remember, the IU schedule from here on out is just Butler and a bunch of tough teams in the Big Ten. That's it. It's just Butler and the Big Ten. And here's the deal. Even bad teams, and I think the two worst teams in the Big Ten are Northwestern and Nebraska, they're still I believe Northwestern is in the top 70 in KenPom and Nebraska's in the top 100. So we're still talking about pretty good teams in the grand scheme of things. And then, I do want to mention Coach's point here. Kenya Hunter, first-year assistant coach at Indiana, played an integral role in Parker Stewart's decision to commit to IU. So whether IU dresses for Indiana this season or next, bottom line is Coach Hunter got a specific shout out in Stewart's social media message saying, hey, one of the big reasons I came to Indiana was because of Coach Hunter's recruitment. So tip of the cap to Kenya Hunter, +1 to him on IU's coaching staff. And Indiana continues to get some good news here. The Hoosiers are 4-2. They're in the top 15 in KenPom right now, even though they're unranked in the AP poll. Hopefully, it's just the start of a lot of good news for this IU basketball program. Now it's time for Who Won the Week in IU Sports, where we look around the world of sporting events and try to pick out some Hoosiers who did some great things. And there were a lot, especially in the pros this past week, that really stood out. How about T. Gray Scales? He was picked up. The Steelers picked him up from the practice squad and put him on the active roster for Sunday night's game against Buffalo. He didn't actually get playing time on defense, but it's great to see the former Hoosier getting some playing time there. Chris Covington, the former Indiana linebacker, was picked up by the Colts to participate on their practice squad. And so in the NFL, you're seeing some of these Indiana Hoosiers making a difference. But the guy who I thought deserved the real Who Won the Week award for this week was midfielder Aiden Morris, who was at Indiana last year. Morris is a rookie on the Columbus Crew, and here's the deal. The MLS playoffs ended last week with Morris's team, the Crew, winning the title, but they did it in shorthanded fashion. They had a number of guys test positive for COVID-19. Morris had to step in almost as an emergency starter for the MLS Cup final. He even assisted a goal in the Crew's 3-0 win over Seattle. And by the way, on the Sounders was former Hoosier Will Bruin, who substituted into the final game about in the 60th minute or so. Bruin scored in the semifinal win that Seattle had over Minnesota. So look, Indiana's men's soccer program, I know they're not playing right now because of COVID-19, but the former Hoosiers are making a huge MLS. Noah, is there something you wanted to point out about T. Gray Scales? I know you're a big Steelers fan.
Yeah, I mean, the Steelers have been riddled with injuries for various reasons. I don't have to go into a lot of Pittsburgh stuff the past couple of weeks, but they've had a lot of inside linebacker stuff. They were down to the wire. They had, obviously, Devin Bush was injured at the beginning of the year. Then last game before the Bills in Washington, his backup went down, and then the other inside linebacker went down for COVID, and then they were playing safeties at linebackers. So T. Gray was a very last second, we need a body that has done the system before, because remember, T. Gray played in some preseason last year, so he's at least familiar with Coach Tomlin and Coach Butler for the defense. To at least he didn't get to see any playing time, which was interesting, just because they didn't have a lot of people whatsoever. But it's good to at least see that he's in a rotation and he's on guys' calls lists, which is at least he's still kind of staying around. I don't think he'll end up making it somewhere, but he's at least still on lists for people to call. Then you got Chris Covington, a guy that, you can't really take much stock in the Cowboys doing a lot of moves for various reasons anyway. So it was really nice to see that he gets moved to the practice squad. And remember, in the NFL, if you get moved to your own practice squad, like he went from the Dallas Cowboys active roster to their practice squad, once they move to the practice squad, any team can snatch them up, but they have to snatch them up onto their active roster.
That's right.
So the Colts picked him up on their active roster. The Colts couldn't have taken him from their practice, the Cowboys practice squad, to the Colts practice squad. He's now an active player on the Colts team. So there's a chance that he could see some field. I doubt it, unless you have a couple injuries. But it's really good for him to see some actual potential playing time now that he's on our active roster instead of just a practice squad.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially a defense as good as the Colts is, even if he doesn't play for them. You've got a guy like Darius Leonard there who plays a very similar position. You can imagine how valuable those sort of football lessons alone can be for a guy like Covington. So let's keep it rolling with our IU Sports Power Hour here, Noah. We had 2 basketball games that happened on the hardwood over the course of the last week. Indiana went to Tallahassee and lost a heartbreaker at Florida State before coming back to Bloomington and smashing North Alabama, looking like a team that was angry and upset that they had lost to the Seminoles a few days earlier. Look, that game against Florida State, it was a lot of what we expected. It was hard fought. It was physical. It was 2 teams that were ranked in the top 20 in KenPom at the time. They were trading baskets, trading leads. Trace Jackson Davis did his thing. Florida State had a few guys who went out and played well, guys like MJ Walker. And then you saw Scotty Barnes, the 5-star super freshman, who, he's going to be a lottery pick when he goes to the NBA whenever he decides. Barnes, who struggled all game, he only had 4 points in regulation, went out and hit a 3 in overtime, and then hit the game-winning Euro step shot with 2 seconds to go. Basically a hard luck bounce, really, for Indiana as far as I'm concerned. That Florida State team is going to get better and better as the year goes on. Even though their ranking has stayed kind of consistent year over year, they have a lot of turnover, a lot of new players and new faces on that roster. So, they're going to be happy that they went and beat a solid Big Ten team in Indiana. I think they're going to continue to rack up the wins as the year continues. But Noah, as you look at it, similarly, Indiana had a pretty decent shot at a road top 20 win. Do you look at this game as what could have been? Or do you look at it as, hey, you know what? Indiana played well, hung in there, got to overtime against a strong ACC team. Pretty good effort in that type of environment.
Kind of both. I don't want to linger on this game too much because I know even in your own Hoosier fandom, we've kind of put this game behind us just because it was that close and it was close to a top 25 win. But I think it was a little bit of both where they were right there and they honestly should have had it. Their offense stalled both at the end of regulation and at the end of overtime. And that's really what did it. Was they were ahead and really, and this was one of the games where 3 or 4 points was a tremendous lead. 3 or 4 point lead was basically what was it, like 5 or 6 was the highest for both teams or something like that throughout the whole game, and it happened like for 20 seconds before the other team scored. So a 3 or 4 point lead was tremendous, and that's basically what happened at the end of both regulation and overtime. Luckily for the Hoosiers, at the end of regulation, they were able to tie it and not let Florida State, which they were about to win at the end of regulation. And then they just stalled yet again. They came out hot in the beginning of overtime. Their offense was clicking it was doing really good. And then their defense, their offense their defense was okay. Their offense just couldn't supplement even just a score. A score would have changed the entire outcome of the game when you get down to such a close game. One of those games where it is a 2-point game, literally almost the entire game. It's hard to see a close game like that, but really Indiana did lose it in the end because they weren't able to score when they needed it the most. And it's hard because you see a guy like Trace Jackson Davis have a game like he did, and then the rest of the team didn't even score double digits, which it's not too bad because they did spread the love out a lot. But it's still hard to see, and it is a little bit heartbreaking when they could have had it. They could have been 4-1, most likely ranked, but it is what it is. It was a good team. It's a tough loss. A lot of teams are losing to bad opponents. Indiana at least hasn't even lost to a bad opponent yet this year, so it's kind of a little bit of both. You could see a lot of the good, you could see a lot of the bad.
Kentucky.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Something in my throat there. By the way, Florida State is taking on the Georgia Tech team that smashed Kentucky. Right now, Florida State's up by 3, sort of in the waning stages of the first half there. But I agree with a lot of what you said. Indiana played hard, was in that game. I just wish they were able to get up and over the hill because, IU technically hasn't beaten a ranked team yet. Of course, you're going to get 12, 14 chances in Big Ten play, but it would have been nice to just have that feather in the cap. Fortunately, the Hoosiers weren't able to get it done. But like I said, it was nice to see them come back to Bloomington on Sunday, beat the doors off of North Alabama. I think the North Alabama teams actually got quite a bit of skill and athleticism. Indiana was only a 24-point favorite against them, and the Hoosiers went out and won by 35. Armand Franklin showed up, didn't he? 19 points in that game, 4 rebounds, 5 assists, 3 steals, contributing in many different areas. And what I liked, especially being there in person, was he was struggling a bit in that first half. The defense was getting under his skin a little bit. He was missing some shots, a couple of which were open. He didn't let that affect him too much, though. He really stepped up he really stepped up and lit it up in the second half. He didn't miss a shot after halftime. 5 of 5, 4 for 4 from beyond the arc. Noah, like, how important is Franklin? I know we got the news about Parker Stewart earlier today. Franklin's still going to be a key guy for this team, as we get into Big Ten play.
Yes and no. I don't think he's going to be able to sustain. Obviously, he's not going to sustain something like 19 points a game. That's I think too far gone for even the most optimistic Armaan Franklin fans. But even if you get half of that consistently every game, just under 10 points would be incredible for a guy like that. First, a guy like that who is by far and away the most improved Indiana player from last year to this year, and it's not even close. You can talk about Race Thompson being in the ballpark, but Armaan Franklin tremendously improved, and he's a guy that maybe if he doesn't have the biggest impacts this year, he might win you a couple games, but I'm more looking towards the future, his junior and senior year, to where he's one of those guys that if Indiana, those championship run teams have guys like Armaan Franklin, and they have a bunch of them.
Yep.
They have a bunch of them. So seeing a guy like that and the steps he took from last year to this year and the confidence that he can have in a game like this is just really telling looking forward. Now, for the game overall, didn't start out this way, but it ended up being an impressive win despite being a Ken Pom ranked around 250th team. So obviously a lower ranked team, but, and I tweeted this out, if this was against a top 15, top 10 ranked team, this would have been a double-digit win for Indiana. The way that their defense played, their defense has been locked down for most of the season so far, the small season, but it's been locked down, and you finally see the result that Archie Miller has when he's able to get some offense with that defense. And that's what you've seen when you've seen teams like UVA, where you got defense heavy first, and you don't even have to add the pack line into it. Just obviously UVA, you see that it's not fun to watch because it's not a lot of offense. It's a lot of defense. When you see an offensive spark from anyone, let alone basically the whole team, more or less, you see the result. Oh, yeah. And it would have been a double-digit win against a very good team, no matter who they would have gone up against, because they kept their good defense and they finally had shots going down.
Yeah, I'm getting a lot of good vibes with this IU roster, and I know we've gotten 6 non-conference games under the belt right now, and one of them was a blowout loss to Texas, and 2 of them were blowout wins over, bottom-feeding Ken Pom teams. But look,
some of them weren't though. Even I know Stanford was not a bad win. Providence wasn't a bad win. They are potential NCAA tournament teams too. It's just weird because they're not a typical Power 5 team that you usually think of when you think of good basketball. It's just weird because it doesn't hold as much water as beating Florida State, which is why it feels different.
Yeah. Oops. Yeah, exactly. And that's the way I look at it too. I mean, Providence and Stanford, I think, are going to look like really good wins as this year continues. But hey, you were talking about defense earlier. Noah, let's talk about defense on the football field, which Indiana's defense is led by Kane Wommack, the defensive coordinator. And well, what happens when your school does well in college football? All of a sudden you get phone calls from other programs. And well, Kane Wommack accepted one of those phone calls, and he's off to serve as the head coach at South Alabama. So the Jaguars, who went 4-7 in 2020, including a 23-6 loss to Coastal Carolina, now pick on Kane Wommack as their next head coach. Wommack was a defensive coordinator at South Alabama a couple years ago before Tom Allen brought him on. He and Allen have an exceptional relationship, but Wommack said, look, if South Alabama were to ever call me, I would be highly inclined to go take that job. And well, lo and behold, their position became available this offseason. Wommack accepted. He becomes the youngest coach in the FBS. I mean, that's it. There's no ifs, ands, or buts, no exceptions, no because of this, because of that. Youngest coach to run an FBS program, but there's no question he made a really, really strong impact here at Indiana. Allen talked on end about how valuable Wommack is to this coaching staff. He said, look, just look at the Broyles Award nomination. Earlier today, Wommack was named a Broyles Award semifinalist for the best assistant in college football. That alone says quite a bit about how impressive of a coach Wommack is. Now Indiana's got a position to fill. Now, the good news, as far as IU fans are concerned, is that Wommack has confirmed he will coach as a defensive coordinator for Indiana until the end of the season. So the bowl game that Indiana plays, Wommack will still be on the sideline calling the plays and high-fiving his teammates after every interception they have, still leading the country, by the way. And then once the bowl game's done, he'll go and take over as the South Alabama head coach. So my question to you, Noah, is where does IU go now? And I'm not looking at so much so for specific examples, because between now and a couple weeks from now, a lot of coaches are going to get fired and hired and available and this and that and whatever. Where does IU go now as far as the type of coach, as far as, do you see them staying in-house or maybe looking outside? Do you see some sort of splashy hire, some experienced assistant? How do you see IU approaching this defensive coordinator opening?
Well, first, I mean, it is really cool to see a guy like James Corden getting a head coaching job. I mean, I'm sorry, Kane Wommack. I'm sorry, Kane Wommack. It is a very striking resemblance between the two. But originally, when I thought about all of this, it makes a lot of sense. It's a guy that came from South Alabama. It was the first place where he got a real shot, and like you said, it means a lot to him. It's kind of like Tom Allen's. He started in Indiana with like high school stuff, more or less started. And then he's able to come back, but for the head coach of the Hoosiers. So it means a lot to him. It means a lot to Kane Wommack to come there. If he didn't have as much personal ties to South Alabama, I feel like he could have waited and he could have gotten probably a much higher job, head coaching job at some place, because of the type of team that he's been putting together, defensive team, over the past couple of years. But congratulations to him. In terms of looking for a new candidate, I think that's something that this podcast can go into more depth as we have less things to talk about. But I know Crimson Cast mentioned this earlier because you remember basically the Nick Sheridan in-house hire after Kalen DeBoer, and it was like, oh, really? But then you think of Tom Allen's in-house hire, and how did that work out? Then Nick Sheridan, he's not Kalen DeBoer, but he hasn't been doing bad. He's been thrown under the bus a couple times, but still, Indiana.
I like Nick Sheridan a lot. Having sat in on his media sessions on a weekly basis, he's a very well-spoken person. He's a smart guy. I know sometimes the offense looks a little spotty on the field, but I think he'll continue to get better. He's also extremely young. Yeah.
There's still a reason why the Hoosiers are 6-1, and it's not 100% on the defense. Not 100%. A lot of it is, but it's the offense still has to score points to be able to win the game. So it wouldn't be surprising, especially with that weird like 4-2-5 type of defense that they run. It's not a typical defense. It wouldn't be surprising if they went in-house. And it would actually make more sense than even the Nick Sheridan hire, because the offense, I feel like, was not as narrow. It wasn't as focused on one specific thing that you needed this one specific coach to be good at to do this thing. I think the defense, since they have had a lot of success there and they are familiar, and they're obviously an incredible defense with the type of defense they run. Tom Allen being a defensive coach too, first of all, he's going to nail the hire. Whatever it is, if he's nailed 2 offensive hires, him being the defensive coach, you really think he's going to mess up? I mean, he found Kane Wommack, this really, really young guy, and look where he turned out. I'm not worried about this defensive coach hire, but that's what it is. You become a team that makes really splashy news all the time when you typically aren't a good program. People are going to come knocking at your door. People are going to leave. Who is it? Someone else made a really good comment in comparison to like the Patriots, where Bill Belichick loses his coordinators all the time because they go to other head coaching jobs. It's the same kind of thing on a different level. But it is what it is. We're going to have to start living with it. That's a really good new normal that we're going to have to start getting used to. And I mean, hey, Clemson never used to be Clemson. Michigan did. Alabama did. Ohio State have always been that good. Clemson has not been that good historically for over 100 plus years. So there's no reason that if Tom Allen's able to stick around, I'm not saying Indiana's going to be the next Clemson, but they can still become up there to where you get guys that are going to stay longer, and they're not going to go for a South Alabama. They're going to wait. Oh, wait, maybe Michigan's hiring for a head coach. I'm going to go be the Michigan head coach, and that they're not going to leave for anything other than that, basically. So all in all, I think I trust Tom Allen's judgment, especially for the defensive side and what he's done recently, since it was Tom Allen, then Kane Wommack, and look where the defense is now. I trust him, especially with 2 pretty good, if not great, offensive coordinator hires so far. He's done a really good job at hiring in-house staff, especially for how young they are.
Yeah, exactly. That's a great analogy used there with the Patriots, because the Bill Belichick of Indiana is Tom Allen. And the question came up today, hey, Coach Allen, are you getting buzzed by other programs and other schools looking to
Great
add?
response.
Yeah. And he goes, hey, look, I haven't talked to anyone about any jobs anywhere. And so that's a tweet he sent out during the it's getting picked up quite a bit. Tom Allen, to this point, has not talked to anyone about any jobs. So that's where things are as they stand right now. Who knows what happens over the next few weeks and months. I don't anticipate Allen leaving, just getting the vibes from talking to him and listening to him at press conferences and his post-game interviews and his media sessions and all that kind of thing. I don't get the vibe that Tom Allen is using Indiana as a stepping stone. That's just my opinion. Anything's possible, but that's just the way I see it. Also, I want to see Indiana go outside the box for this defensive coordinator hire here. I want to see them go out and about, try to grab someone from the SEC where Tom Allen has a few roots, he has a few connections. I would be curious to see Indiana get that sort of level of coordinator, especially given the success this program has had since the start of 2019. That's where I see it there. We also had other football news coming through the pipeline. Big Ten offensive awards were announced. I mean, this is normally something that would lead our podcast. Here we're talking about it in minute number 56. Big Ten offensive awards for the year were announced today. Ty Freifogel was the real headline grabber for IU. He was named the Big Ten wide receiver of the year, but somehow was named to the second team as far as the coaches' votes were considered. I don't know how that makes any sense. In what world are Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson both more deserving of that first team honor? I'm not sure. But to be perfectly clear, Freifogel won that Big Ten Wide Receiver of the Year award. Outside of that, Michael Penix was named second team All Big Ten, as was Stevie Scott, according to both the coaches and the media. Peyton Hendershot was third team all conference as far as coaches and media are concerned. Wap Fillier and Harry Kreider were honorable mention. Those are just the offense. The defense and in other individuals awards will be announced on either Wednesday or Thursday, I believe, this week. So keep an eye out for that over at Indiana HQ on our Twitter feed. Noah, anything stand out to you as far as those offensive players of the year awards are concerned? First team, second team. I thought it was ridiculous that Ty Freifogel was second team, according to the coaches. That to me made no sense.
And it's on a typical year, we'd be talking about that. That'd be the main headline on a podcast. But it's been an incredible year for football all around, just because that's not even going to be a headline. I mean, it's going to be a headline for today, but tomorrow you're not going to think about it too much because of all the other stuff that Indiana has been able to do, which is it speaks for itself on where the program is, that you get a guy for the first time in program history gets receiver of the year. And we're talking about why they didn't even make Big Ten, the first team All Big Ten, which is ridiculous, by the way. When you can see we tweeted some stats and comparisons on for people that they chose over Ty Freifogel, and it's not that much of a difference, especially compared to the amount of games that Indiana now hasn't been able to play. So, but just congratulations for him overall. That's just an incredible thing. It's going to really help for him trying to get into a team in the next level. And it's just really cool to see the Hoosiers, some people getting recognized, some of the team getting recognized for the accomplishments that they're doing on a national stage.
Yeah, right. I mean, at least regional stage, if nothing else. I mean, my gosh, don't even. I was just calming down, Noah. Look, I think hey, 4, 5, 6 offensive players got recognition today. You better believe the defense and the special teams will get plenty of recognition as this week continues, as will Tom Allen. I would be stunned if he wasn't the Big Ten Coach of the Year. So that's the way I see this week playing out as far as the Big Ten Players of the Year awards are considered. Other football news real quick. Yeah, guys, the IU Purdue bucket game got canceled twice. It was canceled last week and it got canceled again earlier today for Friday, so they're not playing that game. Indiana's next football game almost definitely will be a bowl game that they get selected to. Also, Rashawn Williams, a 4-star wide receiver who came to Indiana for the purpose of kind of making a splash at a school that's not very well known nationally. He put his name into the transfer portal earlier this week, so that's something to think about as far as what you'll see all across college football over the next few days. I think something like 100 players put their name in the transfer portal yesterday, so as these teams' seasons come to an end, you're going to see some guys looking for more playing time elsewhere. We've got signing day tomorrow, and Indiana is going to just reload at the wide receiver position. So, yeah, I mean, it does hurt to hear someone like Rashawn Williams put his name in the portal. Couple things. First,
especially personally, since he was on our podcast.
I know, it's so disappointing. A couple things there. First of all, just because you put your name in the transfer portal doesn't necessarily mean you're going to transfer. Samson James did that last week, came back to Indiana. Second of all, Williams won't be the only IU player to put his name into the transfer portal. That's just the way college football is nowadays. So you can expect other players to put their hat in the ring just to test the waters, if nothing. That's pretty much the way I see that playing out. I mean, anything else stand out to you in the football world, Noah? Whether it's Kane Wommack or the IU Purdue bucket game getting canceled again, or the transfer stuff, anything else?
We haven't even talked about we haven't specifically mentioned that the Purdue IU game hasn't even been canceled again, let alone what the Big Ten just decided to do and say, hey, we're going to do 1v1, 2v2, 3v3, and then just not do it, by the way. Just a weird segment of the Big Ten this year, and that's putting it very nicely. But, yeah, Rashawn Williams leaving. It's not too surprising, to be honest, now after this season has mostly been over. It's really sad because I think he could have made a difference. But I trust Coach Sheridan and Coach Allen because this is a year that red shirts don't matter because everyone gets their eligibility due to all the COVID stuff. So this year is a wash completely. So if he was ready to be on the field and he was ready to play, he would have been in there for some snaps. So he clearly wasn't ready in the eyes of Allen or Sheridan to get on the field for where IU is right now. And he feels he would like to play right away, which is okay. And you can't fault a guy for wanting to play right away, especially with the guy when he comes out of high school at his stature. The NFL is still totally on your mind, and it's still totally achievable because you have all of the recruiting rankings for you. Guys that were far worse have done far better in the NFL, and he just wants to get noticed and he wants to get on to the next level, and that's his ultimate goal. So, I mean, you can't fault him too much, and like you said, he still could end up coming back, especially when you've got a bunch of receivers coming back, transferring to Indiana, let alone. So it'll be interesting. And honestly, when you talked about other IU players potentially transferring, in a way, that's a good thing because you see how well the success of this team is going. And you see, it's like Samson James for Ohio State, but flipped. You saw how he was Ohio State and he's like, dang, I'm good, but I'm not going to be that good. And it's the same kind of thing. You're getting good recruits, but now you're like, wait a second. There are guys that are even better than I am getting playing time before it. So it's honestly a step in the right direction in a weird way. You don't want people to transfer, but just because my point is just the level of play is being elevated. So the level of talent is just like, hey, I can get on the field right now somewhere else.
I just hope Rashawn Williams doesn't end up at either Michigan or Michigan State. That's what I'm crossing my fingers for.
He told us specifically on the podcast he wants to get out of Michigan, but you never know, especially a year away from home does a lot different for you, even if you're only a few hours away. You could see that. Let's just hope he goes somewhere else and not the Big Ten.
I know it's something else. I just hope, even if it's not Michigan State, just the overall Big Ten footprint. I want him to go to USC or something, or Texas, and we don't have to bother with him unless there's a bowl game.
I mean, he could go to Illinois and then make Illinois better than a 0-win team. We don't play them very much, and we would still probably beat them. And then you see that he is successful, maybe, and then
careful what you wish for. Last thing I
don't think Illinois is going to catch Indiana by the time Rashawn Williams will be down. I really hope you're not saying that.
I don't know. On that note, it is a crowded wide receiver room. Just to be perfectly clear, right? I just wrote down some names here. Miles Marshall will be back. David Ellis, Jacoby Hewitt, Javon Swinton. You've got FSU transfer DJ Matthews coming in. He was a 4-star top 60 national recruit before he went to Florida State.
Could potentially be the best receiver Indiana football has ever had. Ever. And there's been some pretty good receivers that have come through Indiana before.
Yeah, just physically, he reminds me a lot of Whop Phillier. It seems like an ideal sort of like-for-like replacement. And then you've got Jaquez Smith. Yeah, and then you got Jaquez Smith, the 2021 recruit from Georgia. He's going to be coming up here, signing days tomorrow. We'll see if Smith puts his name on the dotted line. But Smith is supposed to be one of the highest rated IU football recruits out of high school in the program's history. So definitely a lot of star power, and that's a position Indiana's always done relatively well, that wide receiver position. So you're going to see some turnover there, and you're already seeing with Rashawn Williams putting his name in the transfer portal. So Noah, we usually do Big Ten picks of the week at this point, but here's the deal: because of how strange this week has been, and you touched on it a moment ago, how about we do this? Let's throw a prediction out there as far as the Big Ten championship game is considered. You've got Northwestern Ohio State playing in Lucas Oil Stadium at noon on Saturday. Of course, that's going to go head-to-head with Indiana's basketball game against Butler, which is kind of annoying, but that's a whole different conversation. Real quick, to catch up on last week, the three of us on the podcast, Matt was here, Jevin made his podcast debut last week, and we all really hit the nail on the head as far as our Big Ten picks were concerned. How about this? Jevin said Iowa as an underdog was going to beat Wisconsin. That happened. Matt said Rutgers was going to go to Maryland and win. That happened. I said Minnesota was going to Lincoln, Nebraska and win. That happened. 3-0 as far as our upset picks are concerned and the straight up underdogs. And then even as far as against the spread, Matt nailed it as far as Penn State covering against Michigan State. Jevin took the opposite side of that. And then I also said Northwestern was going to cover against the Illini, which also hit. So overall, 3-0 upset, underdog straight up, and 2-1 against the spread. Pretty solid week if you put a pretty penny on our predictions. So let me go back to the original question I asked you. Northwestern, Ohio State, who's going to win? And are we going to see anything kind of strange or anything kind of weird happen in that game?
Clarification, when the podcast came out, it was looking like Wisconsin was or Iowa was the underdog, but it ended up being the other way around, that Wisconsin ended up being the underdog. So,
crazy.
Yeah. But for Northwestern Ohio State, I know that Fox really likes that noon game and they really want to try and get there, but it is weird that typically the Big Ten championship is a night game on the Saturday, and it's one of the premier games out of the whole weekend right before going into basically now college football's version of Selection Sunday the next day. I don't think it's going to be, as much as I would really like to see Peyton Ramsey just throw all over Ohio State for multiple reasons. I think it's still going to be a lot of Ohio State. I think it's going to be more of, I think you asked me to do some sort of kind of score predictions. I think it's going to be a multi-scored game in favor of Ohio State. I don't think to be honest, it's probably going to be a relatively boring game compared to what other games could have been. So, I don't know if I'd put a score to it, but something like maybe 31-17 or something like that, where it's, maybe it's like a typical IU game against Ohio State recently where it's close and then Ohio State pulls away at the end. I don't see Northwestern threatening them too much.
Here's what's funny. I understand where you're coming from, and here's the deal. Ohio State's a 20.5 point favorite, at least as of Tuesday night. Over under is 57.5. So you can see
too much favor for Ohio State.
You can see why the odds makers like Ohio State, because they're 5-0 and they have all sorts of NFL type players, and they were all over the first team all conference awards that came out today on the offensive side. But Ohio State has played one game since November 21st. One game. And we're basically a month removed from that. On the other hand, Northwestern lost a tough game against Michigan State and East Lansing, which I know is ugly, but they've come out and they've played generally consistent football. They've been a strong defensive team. So let's go, folks. You might want to buckle up for this. You might want to slow down and stop walking if you're outside. You might want to pull over if you're in a car. I've got Northwestern upsetting Ohio State on Saturday to win the Big Ten title. I think it's going to be kind of an ugly, low-scoring game. I think 24-23 is going to be your final. I think Northwestern's going to kick a field goal at the buzzer. This is why you got to stay and listen to our podcast for all sorts of crazy predictions like this. I think Northwestern's defense is really good. They're going to have everything to play for. I think the Wildcats pull off the upset, Noah.
I would agree if Northwestern didn't lose to Michigan State.
Yeah,
I would agree if they didn't have that loss. that they'd be undefeated going into this game, and they've had a bunch of really good wins. But you talk about them, and you talk about which is also crazy that they lost to Michigan State, and yet Northwestern is 3 away from Indiana. That's not a knock on them. That's a college football committee. Why is Indiana so close to them when their loss was to number 3, number 4 Ohio State, and Northwestern loses to Michigan State?
Ridiculous.
And they're like right next to them. Anyway, I just got myself riled up.
Yeah,
for
I'm fired up too. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, but I'd agree unless they lost to Michigan State. Again, same kind of thing. They played most of the same teams Indiana has. From in the college football committee's eyes, they haven't played a good team yet. They haven't beat a good team yet. So,
but apparently all these other teams in the top 10 have, right? Shout out Florida, or shout out Georgia, who hasn't beaten anyone. Florida, who lost to LSU. All right, so no, our social media shout out is up next. I know you saw some interesting news with the IU women's basketball team. What's going on in their realm, and what do IU fans have to look forward to with their squad?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously it was a disappointing loss to Kentucky about a week and a half ago, where they should have won, but they just really did not close it out during the stretch. Talk about the men's basketball not closing out the last minute and a half for Florida State. They did not close out the last 8 or 10 minutes, but they have a couple of bits of news around them that they were able to add, which is the cool thing about this season. It kind of makes it interesting. I don't want to see it long term, but it's cool to see how games can be added to the team, like how you saw in football. Coastal Carolina, BYU got added to the game. Exciting. Like, so they're adding a game against Tennessee, which is historically a powerhouse women's basketball program. If you know even a little sliver about women's basketball, you know the history behind Tennessee. Of course, nothing what they are usually, but it's going to be really cool to see. Like, you get games, non-conference games. Like, think about this: if men's basketball would be able to play teams like Kentucky and Tennessee, so it's really cool to see women's basketball playing a lot of those nice big name other Power 5 conference teams, which just happens to be in the SEC in this case. But you've got that in terms of the ranked Big Ten teams, which, remember, Indiana was, for women's basketball, was picked to win the Big Ten this year. 15th for women's basketball. They stay current, but then big teams right now, they got 14 with Maryland. So you got 14, 15, 16, Northwestern 17, Ohio State 19, Michigan State. So the teens in the women's basketball are heralded by the Big Ten, at least as of this year. But I can finally, or one of us can finally say, hey, this week I think this podcast deserves a social media shout out of its own, because Twitter, they finally freed us after 6 straight months, half a year of saying, I got an email the other day saying, oh, we're sorry, your account was accidentally locked. It was accidentally suspended. They even used the word accidentally and mistakenly. And I was like, and it took them 6 months to fix it. But we are finally free. There was nothing that we did wrong. You can follow us. Hey, for our sorrows and our pity, go follow us at the Hoosier Sound if you haven't done so already. Go retweet and say, hey, they're back, please. Give us a little bit of boost for the 6 months of stuff that we lost.
Yes.
And go follow us. I think it's about time that our Twitter was back and going. And thankfully, you can hopefully you like our content as well.
Yeah. At the Hoosier Sound at Indiana HQ, we've got you covered all year. You know, conclusion of football season, men's basketball just picking up, Big Ten play starting less than a little over a week from now, a week from Wednesday night, whenever you're listening to this. So all sorts of fun stuff coming up, both on our podcast and on our website. So definitely follow, subscribe, like, tell your friends, all that sort of fun stuff, because that matters in 2020. So here's the thing. Let's wrap up with this, Noah. Indiana basketball's got a fun game coming up on Saturday. Again, going to Indianapolis, facing Butler. It's an 11:30 a.m. Eastern start on Fox Sports 1, at least scheduled like that as of right now. Butler, like Florida State, is going to have only played one game. That's a correction, actually. Sorry. Butler is 1-0 to this point with a 4-point victory over Western Michigan. They played game 2 of their season on Wednesday night at Villanova. That's a game that's also on Fox Sports 1. Butler's a 12-point underdog in that matchup. But yeah, only one game under Butler's belt right now. Aaron Thompson, their senior guard, went for 21 in that 4-point win over the Broncos, and grad transfer Jair Bolden at 15-9. What you need to know about Butler is this. They're replacing 62.9% of their scoring from last season. So a lot of new faces in new places. No more Kamar Baldwin, that sniping point guard. Reminded me a lot of Yogi Ferrell. He's no longer there for Butler. No Sean McDermott either. He was able to hit a few threes really quickly. He's no longer on the Butler Bulldogs. Newcomers include Bolden, the grad transfer from South Carolina, and 5 3-star freshmen, including guards Chuck Harris and Miles Tate. Forward Bryce Enzi is probably Butler's best player. He was second team all-conference in the Big East, obviously a really good basketball conference. He averaged 6.6 rebounds per game last year and led the conference in field goal percentage at 63%, but it's a whole different team this year. He's going to do a lot more on the ball. He's going to play a much bigger role. The other thing about Butler is they play really, really slowly. They have one of the slowest paces according to Ken Pom in the entire country. Indiana should win this game. I expect when the lines come out, I expect Indiana to be something like a 6 to 8 point favorite against Butler, just spitballing off the top of my head. Indiana's currently Ken Pom number 14 in the country. Butler is 62. So seeing all of that, Noah, what do you expect in this game on Saturday? And give me a prediction. How do you think the game plays out, and who do you think wins by how much?
Ken Pom changes so much that when you wrote that down, it's already wrong because Indiana is now 16th in Ken Pom. It's Butler. I kind of see it like Providence, Stanford, basically, and they are around that type of caliber opponent as well. So I expect, I expect Indiana to kind of do what they did against them, and a sign of a good team, I think, for Indiana, at least being on the right track, will be a 10-plus point victory for them, kind of what they did with Stanford and Providence. A couple of things, like you said, right now Ken Pom has Indiana as a 5-point favorite. And they play Villanova. Butler plays Villanova tomorrow night, or today for a lot of you listening on Wednesday night. So assume it would be 1-1. If they beat Villanova, this is a wildly different discussion. So anything we have said and will say from this point out, if Butler beats Villanova, it's a completely different team. It will be a lot closer. But the likelihood that they beat Villanova is very small. So look for a lot of right now, Butler is in their one game that they've played, they are almost the worst team in defense 3-point shooting. So again, it's one game, but if the Hoosiers are going to have some consistency, look to see if the Hoosiers can make 3-point shots, we have a little bit more faith that this can be a little consistent throughout the year. If they don't make 3-point shots against a bad 3-point shooting defense, then there's a little bit of cause for concern for some of that. But a couple other things, they're pretty good at defensive offensive rebounds, and their turnover percentage on offense is very low because they've only had one game and only turned the ball over 9 times. So it's like you said, Nithin, it's like, hey, you got one game and then we'll be 2 by the game Saturday. So there's not much you can take away, but it's the same kind of thing with Stanford and Providence. So look to see pretty much a mirror game, not necessarily X's and O's, but mirror game in terms of what you saw before and what you saw after.
I mean, it's really bad luck for Archie Miller. It seems like all these teams he's playing in non-conference have barely a game under their belt as far as actual legitimate competition, too. Like Florida State's one game against North Florida. I mean, that you're not going to draw many conclusions off of that. On the other hand, Indiana's got, 4 or 5 solid contests that they've played that Laval Jordan at Butler, for example, can really scout intensely. So it's a little bit
toughest non-conference schedule in the Big Ten.
In the Big Ten, and then I think that metric will only look better and better as the year goes on. I said that before, and I'm going to say it again. I think Florida State's going to improve as the year goes on. I think Stanford and Texas both will as well. And a big reason for that is all 3 of those teams have a 5-star freshman. And here's the deal: I don't care how good you are, that adjustment from high school to college is difficult. And a guy like Zaire Williams at Stanford or a guy like Greg Brown at Texas will really elevate their play as the year continues, assuming those teams continually hit the floor and are healthy and can play. That Butler's dealt with over the last few weeks here. They had to put a 21-day pause on their program dealing with the positive COVID test. So, Noah, as we wrap up tonight, any closing thoughts on any of the football or basketball stuff we've talked about? Anything out of left field you want to bring up here? What's on your mind as we wrap up our episode of the Hoosier Sound here tonight?
First, shout out to Chris already, even during the middle of our live broadcast, already went to shout us out for the Twitter. So thank you very much, Chris, for the shout out already as we are back in live. It's great to be back. We got a game on Saturday, right, Nithin? You ready to get your tailgating on? Ready to see put those football pads on? Just kidding. You're going to get that 11:30 a.m. basketball tip. But it is sad that we won't see some Indiana Hoosier football because it's something that you've been looking forward to, which is crazy. But you do get to see a good basketball match this weekend with some football craziness on Sunday. So check your Twitter, both Indiana HQ at the Hoosier Sound. So more stuff to follow us. We'll be on it. We'll be posting a lot of that stuff to see where Indiana falls. So you get some basketball, you get some bowl game stuff this weekend, and we'll go into next week, hopefully, with some good basketball memories in the back of our head and some football stuff to look forward to in the future.
My final thought is the CFP rankings are a joke. What a clown show. I mean, these are people they run universities and athletic departments, and they allegedly watch football. And if you're going to have this much bias in your ranking system, you can get the heck out of here. I'm not spending no more time on the CFP rankings. It's too bad, especially for Indiana's sake, because they've had an amazing season. And I bet my bottom dollar on this. If Indiana somehow gets to play a team like Georgia or Oklahoma or Iowa State in a bowl game, which I don't think can happen, but if it somehow happens because of cancellations and whatnot, Indiana's going to win that game. I'm just going to say it right now. You can thank me later when Indiana, for some reason, like a 10-point underdog, and they're just going to win.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, this is great for betting, though. Indiana with the betting. If you've been betting on Hoosiers this year, Hoosier football, man, you've been making some money. So, I mean, you should honestly hope that Indiana's an underdog for everything, because they're just going to prove everyone wrong.
I know. I mean, that's the way they've done it. You know, the sad part is we did get some news today that there were 28 positive cases among players and staff, and that's something, again, that would normally lead our show, but we've got so much to talk about tonight. We mentioned the 2 cancellations against Purdue. That's the main reason for that. Tom Allen has talked on end about how the guys who have tested positive are in isolation. The workout groups in practice right now are in small. The guys who are working out and who are healthy, fortunately, they're working out in small cohorts. So that's how things are as far as the football program is concerned. But that about wraps it up for our 173rd show of the Hoosier Sound. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your support. Thank you to our live audience. You guys are all beautiful people. To hear more fantastic episodes like the one you heard tonight, be sure to follow us at Indiana HQ and at the Hoosier Sound to make sure you don't miss any in the future. You can also go to our website, indianahq.com, to find everything in one place. Lastly, if you enjoy our show, leave us a review, share our links, tell a friend. Your support really helps us grow this podcast and reach more passionate IU fans such as yourself. But as always, thank you for listening, Hoosier Nation, and we'll see you next time.